You're listening to Part 2 of Season 2, Episode 3 of Agreeable Disagreements. We ran into some unforeseen technical difficulties with the processing of this video on our cloud-based recording software, which means the audio and video are a bit lower quality than normal. We ask that you are patient with us at this time as we mourn the loss of our pristine audio, and also ask that you feel free to send any and all complaints to our complaint department, sent via mail to P.O. Box 69420, Your Mom's Place, Warsaw, Indiana. Thank you, and on with the episode. We're just going to jump into the next topics here of the Supreme Court's ongoing deliberations and a decision by a court in D.C. And Andrew, you know more about this. So why don't you start with the D.C. one, and then we'll kind of go into the Supreme Court one, I think.
Yes. So from my understanding, the D.C. Court case was the D.C. District, I think, Appeals Court decided last Monday that Trump would not have immunity from any crimes that he committed while president related to his involvement in, I think, anything that happened around the 2020 election. So I think what that includes is his solicitation from Georgia to find him more votes. And this will lead into the Supreme Court case, his involvement in any possible insurrection, which I think is significant because the U.S. Supreme Court has already decided, and I don't remember the name of the case, but they had already decided that presidents, I think I have this correct, that presidents do have immunity in civil matters. So they essentially, from what I know, can't be litigated for civil offenses that occurred while they were president. However, what this case was dealing with was criminal. I think the Georgia one is still ongoing. Supreme Court right now is kind of deciding about the January 6th stuff. But it's still up in the air. But regardless, Trump doesn't have immunity. And they gave Trump's legal team until this next Monday, the 12th, I think. Is that what Monday is?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Wednesday's Valentine's.
Yeah. They gave him until the 12th to basically make an appeal to, or make a decision whether or not they would ask the Supreme Court to weigh in, which I think is unlikely from what I've heard, just because there would be some other ramifications. And also I think he would have to present some kind of new evidence or argument that was substantial enough for them to say, okay, yeah, we'll essentially retry this.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's a significant thing. But how do you feel about it, Cameron?
I mean, personally, I don't think that anybody should be above the law.
I agree.
I don't know that I can think of any particular circumstance where a president should have immunity to the law, aside from, basic like emergency situations of needing to speed down the road, like a police officer, right? Or something like that,
Sure.
Like if he's got to hurry up and I would not have been mad if President Bush, Bush Jr. sped through streets to help get to the, cleanup of 9/11 faster.
Right.
Like that would have been totally fine for me. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
But
so that's interesting that you bring up like law enforcement officers though, because law enforcement officers are a civilian, they are technically civilians. They're a civilian police force. When they shoot somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and this is not how it actually happens, but technically that is still like murder or manslaughter, and is supposed to be dealt with the same way as if, you know, a good Samaritan like shoots somebody who is attacking another person.
Yeah.
And so I agree. I think, you know, no matter what office you hold, there's nobody that should be above the law. I can understand, you know, there might be, I feel like in the case of like a nuclear launch,
Sure.
you know, if that were necessary, I don't think it ever will be. I don't also know what being necessary would mean, or if I think that there is anything that would make that necessary, but
sure.
we're in
But
agreement about that.
I think the second that you give someone in such a high position a level of presidential or diplomatic immunity, you leave yourself open to a huge amount of dictatorship possibilities. Yeah. And, you know, even if it's someone who could be removed, I mean, from office democratically, it's just, I get wary. I've studied enough history, right? Just as the regular reminder, I'm a history teacher, but also like.
But what about herstory? Sorry.
You set me up in a trap when you say that kind of stuff, man. Because all history is also herstory. Gotcha.
Nailed it.
Yeah. You don't have Henry VIII's 6 wives without the 6 wives. You know.
I think it was 7, wasn't it?
No, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived.
Okay.
Anyway.
Which one was Anne Boleyn?
Number 2.
Okay. No, I mean, how did she die?
She was beheaded. Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay.
Well, I mean, we're not going to go into the history of Anne Boleyn. Anyway, my particular focus when I was working on my master's degree was on communist Poland. And I have always been fascinated with how dictatorships are allowed to rise up. And in every instance, I'm not going to say it's the first thing, but in every instance, there is some level of immunity granted to the leader because of their position, where they say, well, I'm going to have to make hard decisions. I'm going to have to do things that nobody else can do. And so I should be allowed to do things that nobody else should do.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we have the phrase crossing the Rubicon, because when Caesar crossed the Rubicon with an armed Roman force, he was at that moment violating the laws as, you know, as a consul, senator. I don't remember what the title is, but within the Roman Republic. Yeah.
The problem with using Julius Caesar as an example, though, is that he was actually very popular, and most people, aside from the Senate, loved him.
Yeah. Well, and he was never actually, I mean, he was an emperor and he declared himself an emperor, but in terms of like the actual like nitty gritty of the structure, he remained a consul in like
perpetuity.
Yeah. It was like, oh, I have no more power than the rest of you, but also the rest of you have to listen to what I say.
Right. Yeah. But no, I think I am always in the favor of more freedom. Whatever, if you have to choose between two things, whichever option is going to provide the most amount of people with freedom, that is the choice that I would make. And
it's hard to argue with that. Yeah.
And so by giving someone diplomatic immunity, you're opening the possibility of a lot of freedom reducing situations.
Yes.
So I think it's totally fine that he was not granted presidential immunity.
Hold on. Not diplomatic immunity, because I do think diplomatic. Yeah, you said diplomatic immunity. I just want to make
presidential. Oh, well.
Okay, so we're on the same page. Like diplomatic immunity, you and I both understand that is necessary, because otherwise, any diplomat, which diplomat and spy might as well, in a lot of cases, be the same term.
Right, but a diplomat shouldn't get in trouble for chewing gum in Singapore on the street because they may not know and they still have an important job.
Right.
No, yeah, I get it. But the Supreme Court decision, or not decision, deliberations, I think are even more interesting.
Yes.
Because one of the reasons we were talking about this in a part that we decided to cut, but one of the things that we like about this podcast is not just how we disagree, but also the things that we agree on. And the ability
just because you
that
put flavored stuff in mayonnaise doesn't make it aioli.
I saw every time I see aioli on a menu now, I think about you. No, we kept that.
We agree on that though, right?
If it makes you happy,
I'll take it.
But we also like to point out a lot of the common ground that exists in politics because we live in a world that is so stratified where we're often defining ourselves more by our differences, whether it's politically, religiously, ethnically, than we are by our similarities. And I think what's going on in the Supreme Court deliberations about Trump right now, specifically in regards to him being removed from the ballot in Colorado, is showing a lot of common ground.
Yeah. Can I just add to that real quick?
Yeah.
I also think that just politically right now, a lot of the decisions that are being made have a lot more to do with, what does the other side want? Okay, we're going to do the opposite, regardless
100%,
of, whether or not that's what's best for the country, or if that's, even the position that they genuinely do hold. And I mean, we've said it before, like one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast is to show that it's not a dichotomy. It's not black and white. And it is possible to have nuanced conversations about tough topics with somebody who doesn't agree with you. And a lot of times I think, at least from my perspective, I found that Cameron and I have a lot of the same values, maybe on the surface, but it's just sometimes like we just view the world differently.
Right. And I think that's the same for a lot of politics, is I think everybody at the end of the day wants the same thing, but the vehicles that they want to accomplish those things are different and often topics of debate.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
but in terms of the 14th Amendment,
yeah.
I think you so far, and we're recording this on Saturday night. I haven't really heard much about it today. I've kind of had a little bit of a politics overload, so I haven't really been looking at it much today. But from what I've seen of the Supreme Court's deliberations on the Colorado case, I think you and I kind of agree that the way that they seem to be looking at it is the way that it should be handled. Now, that's not to say that it's going to stay that way. Or, I mean, they could decide any number of things, and I certainly have their decisions that they may make that I'm definitely not going to be okay with. I'm sure the same is true for you.
Oh, yeah. I think what's interesting to me here, though, is that the case essentially is, should Donald Trump be allowed to be, or allowed to hold political office, specifically president, because of January 6th.
That's where it's interesting, because it's not necessarily about that.
Exactly, because, well, I think the attempt at Trump brought the case to office, or brought the case to court, because he was removed from the Colorado ballot. And the debate then is Colorado allowed to remove him from the ballot because of his involvement in the January 6th stuff? And Trump is arguing, I should still be allowed on it because I didn't participate in it. He's just saying, I just said some things and people took it too far, essentially. And it's
not necessarily just about that. It goes back a lot further to, I mean, could potentially go back a lot further to anything he's done in order to influence the outcome of the election. His team, the thing that just happened in Nevada, where they moved all of the delegates to only serve the purpose or the person who wins the caucus, that could potentially, have an effect. His soliciting of officials in Georgia to find him more votes, that could potentially, it's whether or not. I think it would be useful to just read Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Sure, and I've got it pulled up right here. Or do you want to read it?
Okay. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
You've got the cooler voice. Why don't you go for it?
I have the cooler voice. What does that mean?
I think whenever I listen to the test recordings back, I hear my voice. I'm like, yeah, all right. And then I hear your voice. I'm like, okay, all right.
I think that's just nobody likes the sound of their own voice.
All right. Anyway, you go ahead and read it.
Okay. So what the Supreme Court is specifically deliberating is essentially what this section of the 14th Amendment means. And that section is: no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, yada, yada, yada. They're just listing all the things again. Shall
have engaged.
Shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So essentially, what the Supreme Court is deciding on is what any of that means, because very little in there is actually defined. They don't define what an office is. They don't define what insurrection is. Now, the Senate already had their own committee during Trump's second impeachment that did determine that Trump engaged in insurrection. They determined that they decided that they were not going to move to remove him from office. But also, regardless of whatever they decided, that doesn't make it legislation the way that a Supreme Court decision would be legally and constitutionally binding.
Well, and I would clarify that a Supreme Court decision here would not constitute legislation. It would constitute interpretation of legislation.
Right. And what I'm saying is that what was decided by the Senate committee doesn't count as it doesn't change the meaning of the Constitution, and it's also not the same thing as legislation passed within like a bill or something. Like it doesn't really, for better or worse, it's non-binding in a lot of ways.
And what I find is most fascinating about this case is that even though everyone expects it to be about should Trump be allowed to be president or hold this office, the Supreme Court is more taking the direction of whose job is it to determine this? Whose job is it to determine whether or not he can appear on the ballot? And I find
they're deciding whether or not they're part of what they're deciding is this talking about his ability to essentially run for election or just his ability to hold office? And depending on how they decide, like if they decide that it precludes him from, or anyone who engages in insurrection precludes him from holding office, he can still be elected.
Right.
But then the vice president nominee might become president. There's no telling kind of what would happen in that case.
Well, and I thought it was so interesting that the liberal justices on the Supreme Court were taking the same stance of, is this even something that states should be deciding? It should be a federal decision. And Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Brown Jackson, was talking about the wording in this. Maybe it was Justice Kagan, Elena Kagan. Is it Elena or Alina? Elena. I'm so sorry. Justice Elena Kagan. One of those two, or maybe even both, were talking about how
the one I heard was Kagan.
Oh, okay. Well, they were talking about how there's a specific list of individuals who are not allowed to hold office. President and vice president are not on this list. It is electors of president and vice president, which means
but it does also say or hold any office, civil or military. Now, the problem is that we don't have any precedent already set for that. So this court is deciding essentially what any of that means. What I think they're leaning towards is saying that, and I think that this is a good decision, is essentially that them making a binding decision about, whether or not Trump should be on the ballot or not be on the ballot, because their reach spans every state. The impact is too far reaching for them to just make that kind of blanket declaration and definition, and that this should be kind of up to states to decide.
But at the same time, they're also saying some of this is up for states to decide, but some of it shouldn't be. One of the points that I know it was Kagan and Roberts made, they both talked about this, was what's to stop, or why would it be okay then for Colorado to say this person needs to be taken off the ballot, but Wisconsin decides to keep them on? How is that going to be handled now, right? Under this 14th Amendment, if you're not allowed to hold that office, but it's up to the states to decide whether or not you're actually participating in insurrection, then who ultimately makes that decision, and how far reaching, as you put it, would that be? Because if you're in Colorado and you decide to take, Trump off the ballot, you're now taking away the voice of a lot of people who would be Trump supporters in Wisconsin or in Michigan or in some other state.
Right. And we do have other amendments and precedent that prevents people from things like voting in a place where they don't hold residence.
Right. And so what would the slippery slope fallacy here would be to argue, and I'm using the term fallacy intentionally, but would be to argue that if we allow Colorado to start taking people off just because they politically disagree with some of their actions, then, and you can argue that it is a politically motivated action to remove him, then what's to stop Texas from doing the same thing to a lot of Democrat candidates, or Florida? I think allowing states to just remove people without it going through some kind of federal oversight, who the federal government has the right to oversee federal elections.
And who is making that decision? Because the two examples that we have here are Colorado and Maine. Colorado, it was their Supreme Court who decided. Maine, it was their Secretary of State who decided. That's very different in terms of due process. And I think the spirit of American politics and the spirit of the law, two very different examples. I happen to, I'm going to put an asterisk on this. I happen to agree with the decisions that were made, because I personally, I don't want anyone to make the mistake of thinking that I don't think that Trump engaged in insurrection, and that the Article 3 of the 14th Amendment clearly applies to him. That is my personal view, but I do agree with the Supreme Court's apparent decision as far as we can tell so far, that there's this thing that's been happening, I think, within maybe the last decade, but I would really say the last 5 years, where both parties are trying to find a loophole in order to subvert the intention of, you know, these processes and the
Sure.
way that things should be done. And
Sure.
I
I would agree
think
with that.
this is the Supreme Court's attempt to prevent that from happening. And how they decide will have a big impact on, you know, whether or not people are able to do that. Also, I'm so sorry, my neighbor's dog is outside, and that's
I didn't
probably
want
being
to ask
picked up.
about it, but I heard it and I love dogs. I think
I do
what's
too,
interesting.
but I wish that they would not leave their dog outside barking
Yeah.
for a couple hours on end.
What I think is interesting here about the case is ultimately it comes down to whose job is it to determine whether or not he should vote or he should be able to hold office. Because they're not debating here, did he engage in insurrection? They're not debating, should he be allowed to be president here? They're debating who should be deciding this. And I think that is, for me, my big thing here is we're going to wait and see. I'm going to wait
I
and
mean,
see.
they
And I would be
could.
interested to see how it goes, because if there's a lot of very interesting precedent to be set with this particular decision.
The only part I would push back on is that they're not debating like what insurrection is. It sounds like from you know what I've heard that they're not really concerned with defining what insurrection is, but this, I mean, they have the ability to do that in this case.
That's true.
I mean, that's one of the problems with you know, this section of the 14th Amendment is that it doesn't actually say what insurrection is. And whatever they decide, like pretty much any way they decide on this case, any way they decide to, you know, like anything that they decide to focus on, any decision they make, any direction is going to have a long-lasting influence on American politics, you know, in perpetuity, unless you know, we pass an amendment to their decision, or, you know, whatever, like not very likely circumstances.
So speaking of very unlikely circumstances, let's move on to our last quick topic, which is whether or not this border bill is going to get passed.
Oh God. Wait. Okay. So
That was a perfect segue.
Are we gonna talk about that one though? Because
yeah, let's do it. Let's do quick because we got a little bit of time.
Do you mean the border bill as it was presented before it was killed? Because that's an absolute no. It's everything the Republicans had been asking for. The majority of their members liked it. It was a bipartisan bill. I mean, you've had people like Tommy Tuberville from, I think, Alabama.
Yep.
Yeah. He, a couple months ago, threw a tantrum and obstructed the appointment of several high military officials in protest of nothing being done for the border. And now they got that. They got provision. They got funding for Taiwan to combat any threat that China has to us. They got funding for Israel, which, you know, I think the Democratic legislators are probably less likely to support. They got that. They got at least $20 billion for border enforcement, and they got I think the right leaning legislators didn't necessarily want funding for Ukraine, but that was also in there, and they decided to sink the bill. And so now they're not going to be able to pass anything that even comes close to that.
So let's be clear here that it did pass in the House.
Yes.
after a lot of concessions and compromise from both
Yeah.
parties, and then it was killed in the Senate. And
Yeah.
part of me wants to be like, okay, well, they didn't even consider it, which I'll be honest, I'm looking at several news stories right now, and it looks like Senate Republicans just did not even consider it.
No, they didn't.
However, this is also one of the, I would argue, pros of having a bicameral legislature where it has to pass in both the Senate and the House in identical wording, where, yeah, it makes it a headache to get anything done. But in theory, the idea is that that acts as a filter so that only the best or most necessary bills get passed.
Yeah.
And so part of me wants to be like, yeah, it's really a shame that a bipartisan bill that could have stood as a meeting point of both sides dies. But at the same time, to me, to some degree, that's me seeing the system working the way it should.
I would agree with you, except I think we need to examine why it didn't pass. And the reason why it didn't pass is because Donald Trump told Senate leadership on the Republican side to kill the bill. Because, and I don't know if he said this explicitly, but I think it's pretty hard to argue that this was his reasoning. He doesn't want it to be a win for Biden that Biden could campaign on, because one of the strongest things that Republicans have to campaign on is the border. And if Biden is able to make any progress, and I'm going to be honest, and it's hard, I don't think anyone would deny there is a crisis at the border and it needs to be dealt with. But if Biden gets credit for that, it means that the Republicans and Trump don't get credit for that. And as soon as Trump, weighed in, you had people like Josh Hawley, saying things like bipartisanship or cooperation between the parties is the problem with politics, which I think is untrue, and B, a detestable thing to say.
Well, we got to remember a few things here. Politics is a game, right? And you got to look at the timeline here. When Trump was gaining power, gaining attention, gaining prominence. That's what I'm looking for, prominence. Okay. As he becomes the front runner, sort of leader of the Republican Party, people start doing what he says, because if what he's doing is getting approval from their constituents, then they're going to start mimicking him and doing the same things that he's doing to also get approval
100%.
From their constituents. And if you look at when Trump was ousted in the last election, people stopped doing what he said for a long time. And it's only been in recent months, as the election has kicked up more and more and more, that they've been listening to him again. Right. And it's 100% just got to do with playing a political game.
Right. But now I think we can both agree that what they're not doing, at least in this case, and what they should be doing, is what is best for the country. And what is best for the country is for us to deal with an unprecedented crisis at the border, and our inability and lack of infrastructure to be able to deal with not only the again unprecedented amount of I don't like the term illegal immigrants, but I don't really know a better term. The unprecedented amount of illegal immigrants, the number of asylum seekers, not just from, the places that we think of when we think of, the southern border, places like Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, but now places like Afghanistan, places like I think Syria, places like I'm trying to think of another one.
It doesn't matter. You made your
Yeah,
point.
it doesn't matter. Yeah. Sorry.
I think two things here that I want to point out, and one of them is short. I think I also would have opposed this bill, but I agree that that a lot of things in it are necessary. The reason I oppose it is the same reason that Senator Todd Young, Republican from Indiana, opposes it, which is that there's too much in here that is unrelated to these things, and I would rather see them voted on separately.
Yeah, but that's also, I mean, that's true with any bill.
100%. I think
the
pork bills are
barrel
way too long in general.
Is the name of the game.
Right, but how are we supposed to have effective bills when each one is thousands of pages long? How are we supposed to have effective conversations about these bills when each one is thousands of pages long? And
because it's currency. It's supply and demand.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, I think what you're saying is commendable, but if you were elected into Congress and you stuck by that principle, good luck getting anything that's actually important on your agenda done.
Yeah, and I think that there would need to be some kind of systemic change there, and I would like to see some kind of a new amendment or congressional rule made where things in a bill have to be clearly tied and related to one another.
That's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen, but I think it would help a lot with this particular issue.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is I also agree that there is a crisis at the border, but my solution to it, I would say, is unconventional in that I think it should be significantly easier for people to come to the country. And I think so
too.
And the reason I think that, though, is because I teach a lot of illegal immigrants. I have worked with, I've been around a lot of them, and not a single one was trying to take my job, even when I was working like physical labor in high school and college.
And the jobs that they are taking, not a single U.S. citizen is trying to take that job.
Okay, well, as someone who did try to take those jobs, I will say that that's not true. It's an oversimplification, well, but you have a point.
Predominantly,
correct, right?
You know,
but
those same jobs are available to U.S. citizens who would like to work them. Anthony Bourdain talks in his book about how, he and I think this is a bit of hyperbole, but I do think the point remains the same. He said something like, not once in his career as a chef running a kitchen did he ever have a white guy or like a middle-class white guy come in and ask for a dishwashing position.
Right.
They all came in asking to be line cooks right off the bat. But he preferred to have the El Salvadorian, the Guatemalan, cooks that started from the bottom and worked their way up and earned that position. Those are the ones that he promoted.
And they're there for a different reason too. Those people are typically there because, in my experience, and in, my wife, who has worked in restaurants with people of the same circumstance, a lot of these people are sending money back home and keeping very, very little of it for themselves.
And if they were allowed to be citizens, we could, tax those remittances. And I'm not saying that, that would necessarily be good for them, but it would be good for the country.
Well, and it would also force them to be paid the minimum wage.
That's also true. Yeah.
Which a lot of them are not. And
unfortunately,
there's also,
even if they were paid the minimum wage, they wouldn't be making a livable wage, but that's,
I was about to say that's a different argument. I was about to bring that up and say because in some states, in some towns, in some places it is, and in some places it's definitely not. But that's why it's a minimum, and the states and towns can set their own. But I mean, a lot of these migrant workers are working for pennies on the dollar of what most other people are working for. Yeah. And not only would it benefit them, but it would benefit government income. The only problem is that we would see a rise in cost of goods. The reason lettuce heads are only so cheap is because they're not paying people effective or properly to harvest them, to grow them.
There's
And
a really easy way to avoid that, though, and that's to, in some way, curb corporate profits, which
that's
are at a record high and are the reason why prices are going up. And it has nothing to do with the actual cost of labor, goods, inputs, or inflation. It's primarily corporate profits and people who already have enough money wanting to not make less money, even if that would still be substantial, and in a lot of cases, just wanting to make more money than they already have.
I would hesitate to say primarily, but I will say it is a big reason. It is something that's going on. I'm not going to deny that. But I feel like there's a lot more
If it
nuance to
wasn't
that
the
particular
primary
issue.
reason, then when inflation goes down from a time like inflation goes up, we always see an increased price in goods. When it goes down, if it wasn't just corporate profits that were the primary reason, not the only reason, but the primary reason, then we would see prices go down when inflation goes down.
That's not quite how it works, because it's not going to necessarily see prices go down because inflation goes down. It's going to see prices increase at the same rate as inflation, or in a relative, it should see an increase around the same rate of inflation.
But then it should also decrease at the same rate.
But no, because part of what drives inflation is the cost of goods.
Yeah.
And so
the
you
cost
can't
of
have
goods is
the
just
cost of goods.
The cost
of goods going to go down because inflation goes down. Inflation goes down
but
because
they don't.
The cost of goods goes down.
The cost of goods doesn't go down, though.
Exactly.
But the cost of goods is the same thing as prices.
Right,
the cost of goods to run my convenience store goes up because Coca-Cola, because their cost of goods. Well, my cost, Coca-Cola, the bottle of Coca-Cola is my cost of goods for the convenience store. They're all going up in price, but none of them ever go down.
So really what we're talking about here is the rate at which it's increasing, not the overall flat price. Does it go up or down? But the rate at which these costs of goods are increasing is going to go up or down. And so you're absolutely right.
I'm not disputing that.
Yeah, I'm clarifying because I think what you're bringing up is a non-issue because I just wasn't clear enough.
What I'm saying is that the argument that if you allow these people who are already within the workforce to be protected by the law and receive the wages required by the law, the argument that would necessarily make things more expensive is not true, because there are other things that we can do to not make that happen.
I'm not going to say it's necessarily going to make them go up. I'm saying it's going to make them go up. Whether that's because...
that's definitely true, because we're not going to do anything about these other things that are actually determining the price, which is corporate profits.
Right, because you could say corporate profits are a factor, but even if they weren't a factor, increasing labor costs is going to increase the base cost of that good to go up. Now, I will say that the profit margins they're working with are already so high that they could increase labor costs in a lot of these situations up to tenfold, and it would not affect their long-term financial stability.
Yeah,
and it would decrease their profits by a small amount. So I agree.
It's the same argument basically as like if we increase minimum wage, like the price of a Big Mac is going to go up. And yet you look at countries that pay a lot more for their beef because they have to import, beef. And they pay their workers a lot higher wages. The price of a Big Mac, while maybe more expensive, it's not like a one-to-one translation.
Sure. And I guess what I'm getting at is a lot of these businesses already have wiggle room, and some of them don't. And some of them are going to raise prices because they just don't have that wiggle room if we were to allow migrant workers to have the full protection of the law. But
that's true.
A lot of these companies do have wiggle room, and they're not going to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And that as staunchly pro-capitalist as I am, that is a shortcoming that I understand and do see.
Yeah.
Now, all that being said, I think the baseline of it, profits and money aside, is that we have a lot of people who genuinely want to come here to make their lives better and to make our communities better.
Yeah.
And we are making it very difficult for them to do that. Now, on the flip side, I understand why we don't have an open border, because all hell would break loose within the first few months. And part of the reason we have a closed border is not because of migrant labor, but because of drug cartels, human trafficking issues.
Yeah.
There's a number of reasons that our border with Mexico needs to be clear and supported with a lot of decent resources.
Hold on, you cut out there.
Oh, I was saying that there's a number of reasons why we have a clear, distinct, and fortified border. Human trafficking, drug cartels. So as much as I want to make it easier for people to come here legally, I also recognize and understand the need for us to have a strict border that we enforce.
I don't think anyone's disputing that.
Then why are we forcing Texas to take down razor wire and barbed wire along their border?
Because
and why are Democrats so much against build the wall?
Because a wall is not going to help keep out the cartels. Do you understand how well funded the cartels are? The Sinaloa cartel is like one of the best funded militaries in the world.
You're absolutely right. I'm not going to dispute that.
This wall is not going to stop them, and it hasn't stopped them or anyone else coming in.
Because right now they can just drive around it.
Well, yeah, but even, look at El Chapo in the tunnels. Like there are so many ways for them, and they will find a way.
Sure.
There are so many ways for them to get in. And
criminals are going to find a way to criminal.
And the razor wire wasn't stopping them. What it was meant to do was to stop the families who have paid a coyote who has been taking advantage of them.
I believe the term is bad hombre.
Okay. Coyote being essentially a person paid to help
traffic someone across the border.
Traffic somebody across the border. These families are paying these people who are promising them, a path into America. A lot of times taking advantage of them. A lot of times robbing them outright. A lot of times assaulting them physically, sexually. It's not frequently a good situation, but these families in a lot of cases know the risks and do it anyway because they're escaping other circumstances. What the razor wire was intended to stop were those families, those mothers, fathers, children, and it wasn't stopping the coyotes from doing what they are doing. It's not stopping the Sinaloa cartel from bringing in drugs. And what I might add is those bad hombres are a significantly smaller portion of the group that are trying to come in through the border. And as it stands right now, not only do we not have the means to stop any flow, which we're seeing more people trying to come into the country like within the last year than we have at any point. We don't have the resources to adequately help the people who we should be letting in, like the people escaping torture, people escaping retribution for testifying, the people who we are legally obligated to provide asylum, and we don't have the ability to do that.
And well, I also think here though that the razor wire, barbed wire, I don't think that it's meant to specifically cause harm. I think it's meant to be a deterrent.
Cameron, what do you think the purpose of razor wire is?
To deter people from crossing over out of fear of harm.
How does it do that?
Out of fear of harm.
By
but here's the thing. If you see that razor wire, you are the one who has the choice to try and cross it or not.
Are you going to blame them for believing that the least harmful decision is for them to try to brave the razor wire?
No, but what I'm saying is Texas is trying... my understanding is the idea of having it there is they're not saying this is going to stop people from getting through. They're going to say people are coming through in the way that you just described. And by putting this here, we're providing a deterrent to stop them from going to those people. Because if they get to the border, they get trafficked to the border by this person who says they're going to help them, only to find that it's way worse than they anticipated, then to some degree, that is a deterrent that's going to go back to, okay, well, we shouldn't even bother doing that, going through these people to take us on this dark avenue, because they're just going to lead us to another dangerous situation. We should find another avenue. And
in a lot of cases, once they've already made that decision to trust one of these third parties, it's not as simple as being like, okay, we're gonna go to somebody else for help. They're beholden to them.
I understand, and what I'm saying is, it's not a short-term fix. It is a long-term deterrent of word spreads. We can't use this method anymore. We have to go somewhere else.
Except
we're not even going to start talking.
It's not even effective, though.
I'm not going to argue its effectiveness. I'm not going to argue whether or not it's doing that. I'm arguing that is the idea behind it.
Right, and that idea is flawed.
Sure.
What isn't flawed is providing the border protection agents. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Border Protection Agency. So first of all, let's make it very clear. The situation specifically in Texas was the governor, Greg Abbott, had the National Guard set up this razor wire and essentially utilize the Texas National Guard to keep out border agents who were trying to remove it, but also just hinder border agents from doing anything within this one specific park on the Rio Grande River. Now, to me, what I think is a lot more effective than this razor wire that people are going to find a way to get through, no matter how much of it there is, and B, are not really seeming to be deterred by the existence of razor wire. I think a better way to handle that is to provide more funding to the border agents so that they can hire more officers, give their officers better training, give them more resources so that they can receive these people who would like to come into the U.S. And to the best of their ability, allow the ones in who have, legitimate reason or need to enter our country, and, be contributing members of the U.S., society, the economy. And, for those who maybe don't fit that criteria, give them resources so that they don't at least have to go back to a situation where they're going to, have something bad happen. I'll let your imagination
see, but I don't think anybody in Texas would disagree with that. I don't think that any Republican or anyone in these border states would say
except Greg Abbott.
No, I think
who was opposed to the 14 billion, which it was initially, that then turned into 20 billion, that this bill that the House decided to kill, primarily the Republicans the Senate, that Senate Republicans decided to kill.
Again, because
and that
there was
the border
so much
agencies were
into
asking.
But here's the thing: if you're going to have a bill,
that's not why they killed it.
Well,
They killed it because
part of
Trump
it.
told them to.
Okay, but part of the reason why Trump told them to kill it is because there's $60 billion going to Ukraine, but there's only $20 billion going to our own border. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that we shouldn't fund Ukraine. I am a firm believer that we should. But a lot of Republicans are disillusioned with the federal government's enforcement of the border or the lack thereof, and that they keep putting money towards it and not much seems to change. And so what Governor Abbott did was take matters into his own hands and say, we in the Constitution have our own rights to enforce our borders. I'm going to do that. And so he did that. And then when the government comes to take down what he did, because the government's not doing their job in his eyes, I think he's within his rights.
He's not, though.
He's got constitutional authority to to enforce his own borders. He's got constitutional authority as a state to make sure that to monitor. It's a gray area, but it's something that he could win. I'm not saying will. Could.
I think they decided that the federal government supersedes in this case.
But it's
unprecedented. I'll give you that.
It's unprecedented
that the governor is not able to, or being told that they're not able to direct the National Guard.
Yes.
Because there's very rare circumstances where the president, essentially the federal government, is in direct command of the National Guard.
Right, because the question then comes into, is this authority to enforce your border the authority to enforce your border between other states, or your authority to enforce this border between other countries? Because the federal government also has authority to enforce the border between it and other countries. Yeah. And so you have this Venn diagram where in the middle, you have two people claiming they have the authority to enforce this border, or two groups. And the question is, does either or do both? And if it's both, then how do you make those agencies work together when they may have different ideas or different manners in which they want to enforce that border? And what do you do?
I think they did that. And the federal government told them, hey, you have to let the border agency do their job, and you can't stop them from taking down the wire. Also,
but the state is saying, but they're not doing their job. Right. You're not doing your job.
But the thing that would allow them to do their job is this bill. And I understand what you're saying about how there's other things in this bill that these I'll be generous and say that, give them the benefit of the doubt, and say that that's why they killed this bill, is because there's all this superfluous stuff.
Sure, but at the same time,
they knew full well that if they didn't pass this bill, that not only would they not get $20 billion, they would get far less. And now that's going to be the reality. They cut off, at the best that they can hope for is cutting off their nose to spite their face. But not giving them the benefit of the doubt. That's not why they killed the bill. They killed the bill because Trump told them to. That's what Republican senators are now saying after the fact. They're saying that they made a mistake, that they shouldn't have done that, and that this was detrimental to actually solving the problem and detrimental to the country. And it's not because Trump had a problem with anything in the bill. Trump didn't even know what was in the bill. Trump did it because he put himself before the country.
Okay,
and Trump that's what he'll do every time.
I would disagree, and there's a lot of, we could get into that into another episode. I'm not going to fight about, I'm going to pick my battles here and go back to, it's not just about the bill. It's also about the idea of how much money do you funnel into a program before you decide it's not effective and it's not working. Because, in 2023, they already had a budget of $17.3 billion. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection agencies had a budget of $17.3 billion with a B dollars. Okay. Now I'm not going to say that's
Were
a
they
little
saying
bit of
that they
money.
needed more at that time? Because if you give me $50 to build you a supercar, and I tell you I can't build you a supercar with $50, you don't get to then say, okay, well, you're not doing your job.
But we're not talking $50. We're talking $17.5 billion.
Okay, but
And
how? I mean, we don't even know the scale, though. We don't know how much they were saying that they needed.
okay, let's look that up too. How much money did Border Protection ask for in 2023? There was a White House proposal. Wait, sorry, that's for December of this year.
That's also the White House proposing, which is not the
Yeah.
Border Protection Agency.
In March, the proposed budget included $25 billion for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and they settled on 17.5.
Yeah,
So they asked for 25.
The senators, though. That's what they asked for.
That's WhiteHouse.gov. That was President Biden's proposal.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole problem, is that essentially what they're trying to fight for now is what Biden and the legislators that were aligned with Biden is what they were offering before. And now they're begging for that. And they're not going to get it because they screwed themselves over.
Well, here's the thing. They're not just asking for that. They said, hey, we need $25 billion to operate. They were given 17.5, which I'm not going to sit here and say is fair, but I'm also going to say that they were probably knowing that they were only going to get a percentage of what they asked for a higher number. I mean, that's what haggling is. But then they're saying we needed more than double of what we originally asked for.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
What do you think that they are wasting their money on that has caused them to? I mean, the fact of the matter is their responsibilities have increased because we have a lot more people than ever before coming to the border and trying to cross. They are asking for more money to do their job. And I'm not saying that there's no such thing as bureaucratic incompetence. There absolutely is, but that's also the name of the game. And to not provide them the money that they need to do their job is not only not helpful to them doing their job, it's also hindering it's taking away focus from the thing that we, maybe could be focusing on, which is the bureaucratic incompetence. If you want to fix it, give them what they need, what they're asking for. If they still fail, let's figure out why. Let's fix it there. But
okay,
what
but the
Republicans
argument is that
decided
we've already done that.
is that we're gonna. No, they didn't.
Yeah, the argument that Texas government is saying is that we have already been funneling all this money in for decades and decades and decades into border security, and it has not gotten better. They have not done their jobs.
Right.
They haven't accomplished, and so
that's
we're just
what
going to do it
Texas
ourselves.
is saying. That doesn't make it true.
It's not just Texas. The majority of states right now are taking sides with Texas, including most states that are at the border. California,
I don't
California is siding with Texas right now.
Are siding with Texas and their stance against the federal government, telling them that they can't have the National Guard stand in the way of federal officers doing their job, because that's not.
Let me double check. Okay, they haven't
come
out for or against.
Are not.
Okay, I was wrong about Texas.
Against Texas.
No, so the majority is not staying out. 27 have joined a coalition to side with Texas.
Where are you seeing that?
Newsweek.
Okay.
Yeah. As of January 26th, and it's changed since then because there's another story by Georgia's state government talking about how they just joined a 27-state coalition. So as of right now, it's at least 27 states that are supporting Texas.
Can you drop that in the chat?
Yeah.
Because that is the opposite of what my understanding was.
Now, I will say I
And
was wrong.
I know
that
I'm
California
wrong
is
frequently,
not on.
but I can't be that wrong.
I will say California is not on that list, so I did misspeak there. I think what I'm thinking of is a different map where it was a mixture of states that either voiced support, said nothing, or voiced, lack of support or opposition. But yeah, so I know you're looking at them, and I know we're also low on time, even if we're doing a part 2, which I think at this point we probably should.
What I will say is that what the very first sentence in this this article is a map of the U.S. states shows that nearly all of Republican governors are now backing Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
Yes.
So that's not a. I think what that tells us is not that these that these states are backing what Texas is claiming to stand for. I think what it's telling us is how division has become the name of the game in U.S. politics.
Well, hold on, because
even
not
at the
all
detriment of what's best for the country and their constituents.
But
and
not
that,
all
and that goes on both sides.
Now, hold on. So a couple things to keep in mind here is that that doesn't say that the only people supporting it are Republicans. It's saying that the majority of Republican governors support it. Right? And so there are states on this map that have governors that are Democrat who are also supporting it.
I'm not seeing a single one.
Let me see. I thought Virginia's was a Democrat, but I guess Virginia's got a Republican right now.
Yeah.
Delaware's on the list. They have a Democratic governor, John Carney.
Okay. That's interesting.
Or is that Delaware, or am I looking at a different state?
I don't. I know it's not Connecticut.
No.
Oh no, that's New Hampshire. That's
New Hampshire has a Republican right now. I already looked that one up. Yeah. No, I think I'm looking at. It's underneath Maryland, so it's not Delaware. Sorry, I mistook that.
Wait. Okay, sorry, way down there. I was looking right below Maine, and I know that's New Hampshire. Yeah, this seems like it's just it has nothing to do with the actual issue. It has nothing to do with people taking a stand. It has to do with just obstruction for obstruction's sake and being contrarian. And the fact of the matter is that the courts, at least as far as I know, decided that Texas was wrong. And then and regardless of whether or not Texas and Greg Abbott were wrong, I think it's pretty hard to deny that the Republicans were asking for this. They were asking for, at one point, were asking for more funding. They were asking for action. They were, they got what they claimed they wanted. And all of a sudden they decided, no, we're not going to take that. And now they're going to get a whole lot less to address this issue.
And I will agree that I think it's a stupid decision on their part to say, hey, we want all these things. Why are you giving us all these things we asked for? Get rid of them. I agree that the optics, at the very least on that, is terrible. But I will still say I will disagree that the courts are in the right here. I do not think that it is as simple an issue.
That's fair, I think,
because, Texas is trying to make a statement here. And the statement is not just, we have a right to self-defense. It's, you also, if you're going to tell us that it's not our job and it's your job, then you need to do your job. And you're not. And
but the
no
people at the federal level who are advocating for the things that were needed to for the federal government to do their job, they just voted against that.
Again, because to some degree here, to some degree here, we have to take into account the idea that no matter how much money you throw at something, it's not always going to be the only thing that fixes the problem. It's not the only thing you need. And we've already thrown so much money at something that isn't working. Maybe we need to find a different solution.
What would you suggest that they do that wouldn't cost additional funds in order to make that happen?
Why not let the states enforce their own borders the way that they would like?
Because that still requires funding from the federal government, especially in Texas.
You're telling me that Texas is only... That's fair, but you're telling me that Texas is only using federal funds to fund their border.
No.
So then by letting states have more of a say and by giving some of that responsibility to states, you're not going to be increasing the amount of federal funding. You're going to be increasing the amount of state funding that goes to it.
Hold on. I'm not prepared to say that Texas is only using federal funds to fund their border. What I am willing to say is that if Texas were left up to its own devices, the way that they are claiming that they would like to be, and I mean, more power to them, they wouldn't be able to fund it because they do run a deficit.
Well, according to Texas.gov, it says the state of Texas is funding our historic border security efforts through appropriations of Texas taxpayer dollars from the Texas legislature and donations from Texans and Americans like you. Now, I'm assuming they also get federal funds.
Yeah.
Also, I can't imagine they don't.
Let's look up what Texas's deficit is. Oh, they do actually have a surplus.
Hey.
That is interesting.
You know what else is interesting? The top 5 states with the most debt are bleeding heart blue. Hawaii, California, Colorado, Oregon, Nevada. According to Forbes. We can keep going. Maryland,
Oregon,
Massachusetts.
Oregon doesn't have a deficit. It's in our state constitution that we can't have a deficit, and we have a surplus kickback coming back.
You know what? This is looking at households, so not state.
Sorry, I am privileged in that my my stepdad was a budget manager for the Secretary of State of Oregon, and was highly involved in state budgets.
That's I mean, hey, that's a great correction to make.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we need to cut it.
I think so too. I would like to. I'm so mad that we didn't get to the Tucker Carlson thing.
We can do that another time.
We can, but it's people are going to forget about it.
Good.
And so much else is going to happen within the next couple weeks. I mean, look at what happened between Wednesday when we were supposed to record it and now.
I know. We completely changed topics.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm tired, so let's say our thanks and get out of here.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you to all of our listeners. We did forget last episode to let all of you know that we now have social media. You can find us. I actually don't know what the handles are.
It's just Agreeable Disagreements.
Is it? I thought it was Agreeable Disagreements Podcast.
Let me double check. You think, as the one who came up with this? No, it's just Agreeable Disagreements. It's so the name on the account is Agreeable Disagreements Podcast, but the handle is just all one word, Agreeable Disagreements.
Okay. Yeah. So at Agreeable Disagreements. And we would really appreciate it if you would subscribe, like, comment, Everything that any social media person has ever asked you to do, we would like if you did that. Not everything. Second of all, thank you to Halcyon Club for letting us use their song "This Life Is Tough But Fair" from their EP Headset Emotions as our intro and outro music. And Cameron, I believe you do have a very fun fact for us.
Ben Shapiro was recently featured on a top 20 hip-hop track that peaked at number 16 on the Billboard and was called by Nicki Minaj, quote, "not that bad."
Okay. Oh my God. We can't end on that. I have so much to say about it.
And that's
because
where we're going to end.
You did send this to me and I did listen to it. That's unfair.